Welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. This episode is continuing my coverage of the growing field of candidates running in the special election for Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District to replace former Congressman David Cicilline. One of those candidates joining me today is Stephanie Beauté, who was most recently a candidate for Secretary of State of Rhode Island in 2022. Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Thanks for coming on the show. Why do you want to represent Rhode Island in Congress?
I think it's really important, especially at a time like this, after what has happened with the Supreme Court, and the need for diversity in Congress is desperately needed. I don't know how much more to echo that piece, and not just diversity in form of like checking a box, because we see what Clarence Thomas has done, right? So that's definitely not the case here, but really having folks who have intellectual capacity to be able to properly represent us here in Rhode Island, and who really understands the needs of CD1. If you've lived throughout CD1 like I have, you know that life on the island is different than life in the greater Providence area towards Woonsocket and Lincoln. And it's very different for folks on the West End, and very different for folks who are on the East Bay like Bristol, right? So really understanding what those communities need and being able to actually live there and see what life is like and commune with my neighbors has been one of the great things of being in Rhode Island, but two, what makes me very uniquely able to speak on behalf of my Rhode Islanders, because I've been in CD1, so I know CD1.
Before we dive into policies that you plan to focus on in this campaign and that are present on voters' minds, I want to talk about your last campaign that you had, since it was statewide, so you definitely have some name recognition. So you, as I mentioned, you did run for Secretary of State last year. In that primary versus then Rep. Greg Amore, you received 35% of the vote. What did you learn from that campaign that you're implementing in this one?
So what I learned from that campaign is, one, I've got solid, smart group of people that I've been fortunate enough to collaborate with professionally. And even more so, our message was not something that was tailored to me per se. It was something that really resonated with all of Rhode Island, is that we don't want more politicians in these spaces. We really want working class people who understand our plight, who are frustrated with the state of affairs, who are tired of, silly promises that can't be met. And then the next year comes around, and the next year rolls around, and Rhode Islanders continue to face these burdens. And my plight and my struggles, it was very clear that it wasn't unique to me with these frustrations. It was something that resonated throughout the state of Rhode Island. And so I am beyond grateful and humble that 36,000 of you guys came out to support our campaign. And I say our campaign because it was really a community approach, because we wouldn't get any TV time. They refused to say my name. Same thing that's happening in this congressional race as well. And they didn't want to take me seriously. They didn't think that, I was a kid, was what I was called. A kid like me should be taken seriously. And they did everything that they could to shut us down and mute our voices. But 36,000 of you showed up. And for the ones that didn't, it was really heartwarming to say, I wish I knew about you more earlier on, because definitely fit that description for what Rhode Island needs. And so I think we're still on that journey together. Rhode Islanders want people in these spaces who are struggling like them, who understand the issues of childcare like me, where daycare costs about as much as rent or even a mortgage, which is absurd, who can't afford basic living expenses. I tried to buy eggs and it was $11. I was campaigning in Little Compton and they gave me free eggs. Like, that made me cry. Like, that is how expensive it is to just get by. And people are out of touch. They're out of sync. They're just using the same buzzwords, and our problems persist. And my approach is to be proactive, not reactive. We knew that homelessness was an issue. We knew that education was an issue. It's not COVID. It's the lack of us being proactive, because we keep using these political pundits as a means to stay employed. And I find that politicians have found poverty to be exploitable, and they benefit off of us struggling. And I'm tired of it. I shouldn't have to struggle, and neither should you. We pay our taxes. We pay them to work for us. And I'm here to go to work. And I've done it before. And I know what it's like to be in these spaces. And so I want to make sure that we have a better quality of life. Everyone has a better quality of life. And so, yeah, we're trying to finish the job. 36,000 of you guys came out, and I want 36,000 of you guys to send it very clear to DC, even more so. Let them hear it in Rhode Island, but let's make a movement in DC that change is coming. And the type of change that we want is one that's refreshing, one that's renewed, one that's profound, and one that is not one that's not beholden to these political parties and pundits that we're doing. We want folks who are really focused on working for us. And so this is huge, and this is a momentous opportunity to be able to drive that message home in DC. And if we do it in Rhode Island by electing me, it'll send waves in Tennessee, in Mississippi, in New Orleans, in Texas, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, where folks who think that they're established and that they have all of the connections don't get to decide. We, the people, get to decide. And so let's show up in that way.
Now looking at some policies, both from your website and that are going to be focused on by a lot of the candidates in this special election. On your website, you highlight the need for voting reform. This could be done in multiple ways. There's been quite a number of legislation introduced over the past couple congressional sessions, like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Freedom to Vote Act in the Senate. So where would you start in terms of raising attention to the voting reforms that are needed?
I think we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I think it's very clear, not only just for his legacy, but for what he stood for. There's an attack on that day in and day out. I think some people would say that it's more severe in the South versus in Rhode Island, but I think it's something that is going to affect us even more so on a national scale for where our country is headed. And if we don't make this right, if we don't pass this right now, our future is truly at stake.
As we're seeing those calls for expanded voting rights, and as you kind of mentioned, there's some states where the voting rights are kind of getting pulled back and even restrictive. For example, after 2022, we're seeing calls from mainly conservative commentators to raise the voting age to 21, stricter voter ID laws, like in Georgia, you can't even pass a bottle of water to somebody in a voting line. We're even seeing presidential candidates call to raise it from 18 to 25 to vote, unless they pass a civics test or serve in the military. So when you hear those kind of proposals, what are your thoughts?
I think that this is what has been done to us for centuries and generations upon generations, and why folks continuously say that, African Americans and Black and Brown communities don't show up to vote. It's not true. It's because that there have been so many different efforts placed on folks to keep us from being able to vote. And so these type of situations not only discourage and limit access, but also it creates that generational ripple effect. And the only way that we're able to combat that is by going even further and making it hard, so that way they understand that our right to vote is not one that we are taking for granted, and it's not one that we're going to take sitting down silently. And so we all need to unite on this, not just Rhode Island, but as a nation as a whole, to be able to make sure that we can actually have democracy. Democracy is what's really at stake. The ability to cast your vote and share what your perspective is on a particular matter is something that should not be allowed to be infringed upon, not at all. And that is especially if we can send 18-year-olds to go and serve in our military. How dare us send folks, to go out and fight our wars, but don't think that their rights to vote and their voice counts. That's beyond me. And that also shows what areas that they're targeting to make sure that those folks don't have the same ability as other folks do to be able to vote. And so they want to make sure that only a particular group can advance their issues and their agendas. And that's not the definition of democracy, in my opinion.
If you're elected to the House, it's currently under GOP control, so it might be tough to get some of those voting reform bills passed, like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But there probably are some ideas, like maybe making Election Day a federal holiday and ending gerrymandering nationwide, that could probably get some bipartisan support. Are there any ideas in mind that you would try to reach across the aisle on?
So one of the great things about what makes me uniquely qualified in this space is that the threat of cyber risk, cybersecurity, machine learning, and AI to our nation. It's not the sexy thing here to talk about in Rhode Island, but if we're really being honest about the knowledge and lack therein in our current elected officials, we cannot sit down and allow this to continue. Someone can get on the phone and it sounds like me and says, hey, I want you to make a huge donation. And then you do, and it ends up in the Cayman Islands somewhere, right? And so we've really put our folks at risk. And then another thing is people can kind of use, since everything has really been online anyway, to cause issues within our nation. Turning down power grids, creating electric surges, sending out mass media messages to folks on Facebook or TikTok, right? To be able to generate some type of perceived threat for folks to react and respond on. I think that is something that not only my fellow folks in Congress would not be open to hearing, but in fact, I would probably be welcome to join those special and select committees because I have the unique experience to be able to talk about that and to be able to go toe to toe with a Mark Zuckerberg or even with Elon Musk or anyone from TikTok to talk about what back-end integration looks like and to talk about systems engineering and to talk about vulnerabilities and any threats that they're going on and to talk about their SOC 2 process, right? So being able to have those type of conversations, I don't think we need Marjorie Taylor Greene to be the one to have that conversation. I think we need some smart people in Congress. And what better way to make sure that Rhode Islanders are safe in that respect by having someone to be able to champion that and to being able to do that, to be able to present their expertise in that arena. And I think that I'd be able to do that with Democrats, Republicans, progressives, and even the far extreme right. I think that they would also agree that there are severe vulnerabilities that they're not aware of, and they would like to be educated on that. And I would be honored to be able to serve my country in that regard.
Before we move on from voting reforms, I also want to highlight some of the ideas and calls in regard to expanding the right to who can vote. There are ideas right now such as lowering the voting age to 16, which was recently introduced by Congresswoman Grace Meng from, I believe, New York. And then in Rhode Island, we've recently seen a law get signed into law that 17-year-olds can now vote if they're 18 by the general election and they can vote in the primary. Should the voting age be lowered from 18?
So I think that's an interesting question. I think kids know what they want. I think that being able to talk about, the effects of the education system in their particular communities and their districts, I would love to see it go down to 15, if I'm being quite honest. I think students are smart and they're able to really advocate for a lot of issues that are impacting them, and having their voices amplified in that space. I think it would be it would be important and necessary to bring that piece to fruition. And so I think 15 would be solid, in my opinion. At 16, you get to get your permit and drive, right? If we can trust you to get on the road and drive a car, I think we can trust you to express your opinion and your views. And honestly, that also boosts civic engagement because then you see the impact your voice has had in your community. And I think that that's great.
Would it be 15 for, if in a perfect world where you get to decide at 15 for every elected office, or how you see some proposals where it's like, 16 for school committee and then 18 for the rest?
I would say for school committee, especially since it impacts the education and how it and the decisions that are being made in your local community, and then 18 for presidential election. So that makes sense because that's the overall view. So that in my opinion, I think that you're starting to prepare yourself by being able to impact the decisions locally that affect you, and then being able to see that on a global scale. I think that would be, in my opinion, the best approach.
Reproductive rights are without a doubt going to be a top issue on voters' minds in this special election cycle. Just starting off with a base question, do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice?
Pro-choice. I think everyone should be able to make that decision for themselves, and no one else should be able to usurp that decision.
Would you favor voting to codify Roe on the federal level?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There are some calls, especially after the Supreme Court case that overturned Roe v. Wade, to go beyond just codifying Roe, which would require repealing the Hyde Amendment, which, for those watching, restricts the use of Medicaid funds for abortions if it's not in the case of if it's not in an instance of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. Would you favor repealing the Hyde Amendment?
I would.
Another key issue aside from reproductive rights that's also going to be on voters' minds is the issue of addressing gun violence. The big ticket item, as I've been talking about with a lot of candidates, is passing an assault weapons ban nationally. Where do you stand on that idea?
So I think that comprehensive gun reform is necessary. I have family who are currently serving in the military. They're on active duty. And then I have great friends who have served our great nation, who've been in the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and I'm fortunate to have them here with me. Assault weapons ban needs to make sure that we don't want guns in the hands of folks who are not properly trained, who know how to use a rifle. We do not need regular people to be able to go into a Walmart and shop for a gun and then go out in the streets and physically harm students, or even harm someone that they just have a difference of a perspective on, right? I think that that's something that we can do a better job at. And I know that that's something that Republican Party doesn't want to hear. But I don't believe in this notion that we are coming to just take away everyone's guns, that's not true. That is not true. So the Second Amendment is very clear that we have the right to bear arms. But if you want to join a militia group, join the Army, join the Marines, join the Navy. Like, there are so many other ways that you can contribute to keeping your community safe. And so I invite you to consider that as a public service, announcement to you to join in those respects if you really want to serve in that regards and make sure that your community is safe. But folks having an AK-47 at home puts everyone's life at risk. And what I want to also see is that anyone who purchases a gun, any regular gun, so I'm not talking about AKs, right? So any regular rifle, that you are required to take a written test, pass that written test, and not just that, have physical training on being able to properly maneuver. And then I would like there to be an assessment on a psych evaluation that ties a physician with the person who's looking for a gun. Because just because you know how to shoot it, just because you know how to operate it, doesn't mean that you should have a gun, right? And we want to also make sure that anyone who has a history of domestic violence does not have access to weapons to be able to hurt someone. And so I think that we need to be very comprehensive on who gets to own a gun, and that there needs to be laws that severely criminalize anyone who owns a gun who allows a minor to use it. The same way that we go through all of these steps to get a driver's license to be able to operate an automobile, right? And we're out on the road. And if you hit someone with your car, you are responsible. That same type of responsibility should not be foreign if you own a weapon. If you want a weapon, you need to understand the consequences therein and owning it and operating it and being responsible for properly storing that weapon. So I think that if you want a gun, don't want to object to you having that piece to that rifle, I get that. You want to hunt in the woods, there's a lot of hunting that happens, in the greater northern area of Rhode Island. And I want you to be able to do that. I'm not a hunter. I don't want to kill Bambi's mom, but that might be something that you enjoy. And I respect that. I do. But you should also be held responsible if your gun gets in the hands of your teenager and he hurts someone. You should be charged with that. And so I think we need to go a little bit further than just an assault weapons ban.
The calls for addressing gun violence also go beyond banning the national assault weapons ban. You kind of touched upon some of those policy goals like universal background check, and it sounds like safe storage laws as well, as you kind of mentioned toward the end there. So, for example, California Governor Gavin Newsom is proposing a 28th Amendment, which would include similar policy goals like universal background checks, implementing a reasonable waiting period before a firearm purchase, and then raising the age to be able to buy a firearm from 18 to 21. Could you see yourself supporting those kinds of policies?
So I don't know that I would say that you need to go from 18 to 21 to be able to purchase a gun. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you are 18 and you serve in the military, and you're already trained, then I don't think that now that you're a civilian, you don't get to have a weapon. I think that makes it a little bit fuzzy in those areas. And so I want to be mindful of that. But universal background checks, waiting to be able to own a gun, I guess the question would be, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting to make sure that nothing shows up? I think that our systems are up to date. I remember, when we were loading our internet services, the dial-in system would take forever. So we're very, robust in our technology, infrastructure. And so being able to have a rifle after you have shown that you've completed all of those steps, a psych eval is present, and you've gotten all those clearances, I think that you should be able to own a gun. And especially if you are 18 and you're serving in the military, I don't think someone should say, no, you can use a gun here to go and kill folks and fight for us in different wars. But you can't have one to store in your homes. I think that's strange to me. So I think we need to be a little bit more realistic on what we're asking for. But I appreciate the effort, and I think that it's a solid effort, and I think we can go further than that.
Your website also highlights empowering Rhode Islanders in the digital age, citing issues like protecting folks from identity fraud and also promoting digital literacy. How would you approach this kind of topic legislatively?
Federally funding schools. So a lot of our schools now, what has created an issue, honestly, an equity issue, is that our schools are primarily funded through taxes, right? So the taxes are home taxes. So if you live in Jamestown versus you live in Providence, the cost of homes in Jamestown is higher than, on the south side or west end of Providence. And so those schools get lower dollars, which means less access to a lot of resources. And I want to see that change. I really want us to invest into our schools and not just taking government money and just saying we're going to just target this one school. By having federally funded dollars for all of our schools, I think levels the playing field. One of the biggest things that I want to champion is having STEM presented in our school curriculum as part of our status quo. If we're being honest, we're entering now into the knowledge era. So before we had the Industrial Revolution, where everyone was kind of working in factories and mills, and now those factories and mills have closed down. And whether we are ready to accept it or not, we're entering the digital age. And so folks who are, considered knowledge workers, who are building out these systems, right? If you've gone to a checkout aisle, you see that you're self-scanning. Someone had to create that software and that solution. And a lot of the kids now have grown up with a phone, with an iPad, with a VR machine. So they're naturally talented at this. And so what more sense does it make to be able to give them the credentials to walk away from high school and not feel like you need to go to college in order to land a position like that? You could be able to finish your high school education, and should you decide to enter into STEM, into any type of, STEM related field, have the credentials necessary to be able to code, do SQL testing, to be able to write technically. There's other things that are not just science and math, but there's also arts with the UX and UI design, the position of a button, the color of it, the graphics around it, right? All of those things are intrinsic to technology piece. And then one of the other values of STEM is that it fosters critical thinking. Imagine you see something online, you're able to kind of parse that information and then make a logical deduction from what your full understanding of that is. And so there's so many other opportunities besides just, coding and designing and all of that other stuff, but really it challenges your brain to think beyond what you're normally faced with. Because I've learned from being at Hope High School and Gilbert Stewart, the things that you were naturally gifted with, they start to put you in a box in a sense, and then you're working in this test taking type of scenario. And when you walk away from high school and then you go to college, it's like, wait, completely different from what I've learned. And then you leave college and now you're working with people, and that itself is a mind blow, right? And so I want to make sure that our students are equipped, they're competent, and they're prepared to succeed on day one after they leave high school. College is great, but it's not for everyone. And let's be honest about that. And so I don't think we should promote college as the end all means. And one of the things with federally funded STEM program that I really want to push as an initiative, it helps folks to get into trade jobs as well, because there are hands-on jobs that folks can do. My brother is someone who works well with his hands, and he loves that. I am more of a logical, critical thinker. And so there are so many ways that we can use that skill set to help folks build out our next best and greatest eco-friendly school. It's 2023. You'd be surprised how we can be more modern and revolutionary by really presenting these skill sets to our students. And that way our teachers have the resources that they need, and they're not beholden to whatever tax group based on the particular zip code that they're teaching in.
There was a topic you mentioned toward the beginning of the interview that kind of played into a question I wanted to ask you about now that we're at this point in the interview, which is artificial intelligence. It's a kind of a scary topic now that we're seeing. You can make the voices of people say something they never said. You can make an artist sing a song who's dead. You can put someone else's face on another person's face. It might even get to the point where videos and audio is not admissible in court because of this. I know this might be a loaded question, but since you're an expert in the digital world way more than myself, how should the concerning rise of AI be addressed?
I think that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we are proactive and not reactive, right? And so my concern here is, how do folks use AI and cyber technology to monitor you? What if you and I have a difference of opinion and you see things in a different lens than I do? And because I now have this control of the access to this type of information, especially from a government standpoint, I can monitor you. I don't have face recognition on my phone because I know, but if you use face recognition, I already have that data, right? I know where you are from the sensors in the camera because they tag your license plate, and they're already using it in China. So I'm not trying to send out, propaganda type of information. But if we're being quite honest, the way that technology is going, and when it's not really regulated to make sure that it is not infringing upon the rights of our civilians, we enter into dangerous territory here. And if we're being pragmatic, the way that our history has been in this nation has not been to use technology for the greater good, even though it can be used for the greater good. It has often been used and designed by folks who are either out of touch and then leverage against a particular group to be able to I don't know. I'm trying to find the most sensitive of words here, to sequester any particular group from creating an uprising, right? As folks like to label those things. And so I think that that's dangerous precedent here when it's allowed to be free-formed and for folks who don't really understand how it works. And there's also a benefit, and I see that with AI and with cybersecurity and learning from that. But harnessing that and making sure that companies cannot use it to harm us, that the government itself cannot use it to surveil us, is also imperative, and to make sure that we have legislation that keeps folks safe. I don't want someone to be able to hack into your phone and leak that information, the same way that I wouldn't want information put out on social media that could cause unrest in a particular nation. And that has happened before in our election cycle, and we've seen that because we were not ready. We were not well equipped. And I remember when I was an undergrad at URI, we were learning about internationalization and how China would be the leading nation. And at the time, I remember a lot of my classmates were like, no, America's always on the forefront of a lot of different things. But when we look at technology, we are so far behind from what people are doing. And now that we're catching up, we need to make sure that our legislation is prepared to face those advances. And I'm ready to champion that.
I didn't have this one written down, but TikTok's getting a lot of bad rap right now because of the security concerns. Where do you stand on the calls to ban TikTok?
So where your data is stored is really important, right? And so there's a lot of folks who have cloud storage based on which geographical location, because you want to make sure that that data comes to you quickly. And the issue with TikTok is that it is one owned by the Chinese government, in which case we don't have the right to access certain information and how they're using certain information. And that puts us at a huge vulnerability. I don't have TikTok. I don't have any intention on getting a TikTok. And I know better to not have a TikTok. Okay, so that is where I stand. If anything, I hope that that sends a clear message on where we need to be with TikTok. I think we can develop our own applications here that are safe, that we know that it's not going to be used to prey on folks who are susceptible, because there's algorithms that are particularly designed to, I post at such and such time, I know that you're awake, I know what you're looking for, I know the things that are interesting to you, I know that I can push out a particular information to make sure that now you are looking for shorts and now I'm suggesting pants, right? And then you go from pants to now I'm suggesting a trip to Bermuda, and you're like, wait, I didn't know I wanted to go to Bermuda, that's a great idea. Now you're looking up, trips to the islands. So there's a lot of way that data has been used to manipulate and coerce people unbeknownst to them. And I think that TikTok is as entertaining as it is and seemingly innocent. It is not all that it cracks up to be. And I think that we need to take a sharper approach with TikTok, in my opinion.
I have a couple shorter form lightning round questions I want to ask so we can get through some last minute topics. Do you support or oppose statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. I think it's about time.
Banning members of Congress from trading stocks, would you support or oppose that idea?
Support. You go to serve the people in Congress. You don't go to become wealthy. And so I think that that's necessary. And folks who are continuing to do that, I think, honestly, they should either resign or reconsider their positions.
Are you in favor of or opposed to congressional term limits?
I am in favor of congressional term limits.
And lastly, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ray.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
That for congressional term limits, I think having 3 full terms, in my opinion, is a strong sense of ownership, that you had a time to do something. If you're not able to do it, someone else should be able to kind of show up and finish the work there. Folks who are thinking 10 years, 20 years, I think those are career politicians who really get to kick the ball down the line further and further. And I don't think that that does anything for our country. And we get to have fresh perspectives come to the table every single time. And I think that's really important.
And lastly, for lightning round, who would be one member of Congress that you look the most forward to working with?
Ayanna Presley. I've met her many, many times, and she has been a source of hope and inspiration, especially with fundraising, because that is tough. And she's explained to me, you know, what her route and her journey has been. And, you know, she looked at my Secretary of the State race and she gave her own insight to that. And she's honestly a breath of fresh air, a genuine, humble person who is really about the business and really works at making things be more equitable in Washington.
My final question is on the non-political side. Last time I had you on, I asked the famous, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for question. So I'm going to pull out an alternate that I usually save. In your opinion, what do you think is the biggest misconception Rhode Island gets from non-Rhode Islanders?
The biggest misconception that Rhode Islanders get from non-Rhode Islanders, that we all live in Long Island.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yep, that's honestly the top one. It's always Long Island, and then you say, nope, Rhode Island, and then they'll never get it. Either that or they'll say, isn't that near Boston? It's every single time. I wish we'd get our own national identity. Well, that's all the questions I had, Stephanie. I want to thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
Anytime. Yep, absolutely. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you next time.